Me suing the university felt a lot like David versus Goliath. Like I stood no chance at all because, I'm just a little student. A lot of our events were simple events like recruiting on campus and trying to get new members into our group.
Chris Morbitzer founded the Young Americans for Liberty chapter at the University of Cincinnati.
You had to request permission at least 2 weeks in advance for any outdoor area. And oftentimes we wanted to recruit based on current events that were happening. We only had at most maybe a couple days before the current event wasn't current anymore and people wouldn't be interested by it.
They kept running into roadblocks, says YAL senior advisor Rashal Wanigasoria.
We were handing out flyers along Main Street. Everything was going fine until finally a campus bureaucrat just came up to us and she plainly said, "You can't hand out flyers here. If you continue to do this, your group will be blacklisted and you'll be kicked off campus."
And when YAL members wanted to circulate a petition for a right-to-work initiative, administrators told them they had to stay within the free speech zone, something the students had never heard of.
The free speech zone is a small triangle on campus. There's really no regular foot traffic.
When we measured the size of the free speech zone, it came out that it was only 0.1% of the entire land area of the main campus here. While we were standing in the free speech zone and unable to really approach that many people, just probably a few hundred yards away, we could see crowds and crowds of people walking to and from class that we weren't allowed to approach.
If YAL members left the free speech zone, administrators said they'd call the cops, and the students could be charged with trespassing, an offense that carries a penalty of up to 30 days in jail.
I think it's absurd that they were threatening to put me in jail for exercising what is a constitutional right.
With their frustration mounting, they turned to FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, for help. Greg Luke Yanoff is the president of FIRE.
FIRE had been writing the University of Cincinnati for years, explaining that this ludicrous free speech zone policy would be laughed out of court, that it was laughably unconstitutional.
A university attorney responded to FIRE, writing that the free speech zone was indeed constitutional, and that it was needed to ensure that learning would not be disrupted.
I think that's absolutely ridiculous that as a student on campus, I can't go around and get signatures for a petition that honestly doesn't bother any classes or disrupt any learning on campus at all. In fact, I think it promotes learning.
They decided there was only one way to force administrators to pay attention to their free speech violations. Chris Morbitzer would sue his own university in federal court.
Me suing the university felt a lot like David versus Goliath. Like I stood no chance at all.
We were all pretty certain that Chris was nervous. We were all kind of nervous.
Because, I'm just a little student and here's this behemoth institution that I'm going up against.
It's rare that a student would take on a major university.
These are wealthy, huge corporations with lots of power over your future.
FIRE teamed up with Ohio's 1851 Center for Constitutional Law, who represented Morbitzer for free. The team would have to wait for the lawsuit to make its way through the court system. In the meantime, they tried the case in the court of public opinion, and it took off.
It spread like wildfire, and my friends would be coming up to me and telling me about the latest article. And I didn't even know this article existed yet.
Spreading the word beyond campus was also important because free speech zones aren't confined to campuses.
These gentlemen have violated our constitutionally protected rights to free speech without cause.
Officers handcuffed this couple who were passing out End the Federal Reserve flyers at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the same site where America's founders adopted the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
I advise you take a step back.
Where today this monument honoring the First Amendment looks more like a gravestone for free speech.
What are you teaching the kids? I don't understand this.
You can find free speech zones at the last inaugural parade, outside the courthouse that held the Casey Anthony trial, and at political protests.
It is a disgrace to the First Amendment that protest in some place in this town must take place within a steel cage, surrounded by barbed wire.
Americans flock to monuments of liberty, but then look on passively when free speech is threatened.
Too many people these days are only concerned about free speech when they're getting censored, when their side is being told to go to the free speech zone.
Let them go! Let them go! Let them go!
Hardly anyone joins in this man's attempt to shame the officers.
Let them go! Let them go!
I think that one thing that really should unite Americans is the understanding that no matter what you believe, you defend the freedom of speech as a principle, not just as a political tactic.
During the 60s, free speech zones were used to promote speech, but somehow administrators eventually used them to restrict speech. In 1989, students at Tufts sold t-shirts listing reasons why a beer is better than a woman. Administrators responded by implementing one of the first modern free speech zones. However, they ultimately backed down after they were embarrassed by bad publicity.
Welcome to Valdosta State University's Free Speech Zone.
Fire helped defeat free speech zones at Valdosta State and other colleges like Texas Tech, which used to be home to a 20-foot wide free speech gazebo.
I had a friend who had a degree in mathematics from MIT, do the dimensional analysis on this, and he worked out that if, God forbid, all 28,000 students wanted to engage in free speech activities at once, they would have to crush themselves down to the density of uranium-238.
Yet free speech zones still exist at schools like these and many others. Back in Ohio, Morbitzer's lawsuit, like the original David versus Goliath, came to an unexpectedly abrupt conclusion.
When my lawyer called me and told me that we had won the case, I remember jumping up and down with excitement.
I was ecstatic. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was just so happy.
U.S. District Court Judge Timothy Black ruled that the free speech zone and other restrictions violated students' free speech rights. There is no danger to public order arising out of students walking around campus with clipboards seeking signatures, he declared.
The news that we had won the case spread like wildfire all over Facebook, all over Twitter. Students were very excited.
The University of Cincinnati decided to dig in its heels to defend this free speech zone, and for the life of me, I have no idea why.
We wanted to find out, but the university ignored our interview requests.
They're a big public university that lost a lawsuit to a student, and so I'm not surprised at all that they didn't want to talk on camera.
It's the students teaching the administration, teaching higher education itself, a lesson about freedom of speech.
It just seems very strange, backwards almost.
It's backwards, but at least someone's doing some teaching about rights on campus.
These days, YAL members are free to pass out flyers all over campus, and events are much easier to arrange compared to before the lawsuit.
We organized a peace rally. It was much easier to reserve the outdoor space. It was much smoother and much faster.
It's amazing to look back and see where we started and what happened just because of a small little petition that we wanted to circulate on campus. Now the whole campus is open to free speech.